She thumps a cane and drinks champagne. She's formidable and judgmental, but we can guarantee that she's a quintessential Lady D, but recognizes great potential. What would Danbury do?
Welcome to What Would Danbury Do? Your guide to Julia Quinn's Bridgerton series from A to V. It's a split setting this week. Our newlyweds are rusticating in the country, while the rest of the ton remains in London. But will this wildest dream turn into a nightmare? Only one way to find out. This episode of What Would Danbury Do is brought to you by Ella Quinn and her latest novel, The Most Eligible Viscount in London. It's a Regency romance that explores how relying too much on the head and not enough on the heart can really wreck a relationship. So we've got our hero, Gavin, who has his reasons to believe that love matches are a disaster. So even though he's absolutely mad for our heroine, Georgie, he presents his proposal as a business venture. And Georgie, sensible and in touch with her emotions, is looking for something more in marriage and turns him down flat. Therein begins the shenanigans amongst a large motley crew of charming and engaging characters and eventually a happily ever after ending. We wouldn't do that to you. The Most Eligible Viscount in London is available now, and you can find it online or at your local independent bookstore. If you'd like more information or want to learn about Ella Quinn, who has an intense bio, including being the first woman assigned to a Green Beret unit, you can check out her website, ellaquinnauthor.com.
So, Daphne and Simon arrive at Cliveden and proceed to ignore all of their duties to have lots and lots and lots of sex. Many scenes of a pained Simon withdrawing ensue. Colin announces his engagement to Marina, and they plan to flee to Gretna Green to escape the censure of his family. Daphne begins to understand reproductive science and conducts an experiment that leaves Simon coming inside her for the first time and confirming that he can have children. He has just chosen not to. Marina's condition is revealed and whistled down, leaving Colin heartbroken. This episode features a Taylor Swift sex montage, Machiavellian behavior by 3 different women, disappointed pig farmers, and separate bedrooms. This episode also comes with a content warning for scenes featuring dubious consent and reproductive coercion.
I'm Rudy.
I'm Kate.
And I'm Adele.
We've got a lot to get through, and I suspect 1 or 2 points that are going to maybe cause a lot of discussion.
I have a lot fewer notes this time around because that bump, cutscene that we were doing over the last few episodes to get through a lot of the content has really slowed down.
I suspect it's because this episode is very clear about who its main characters are. We really only have 4 players. Now that I've said that, I also am really interested to know whether my 4 are like the same 4 that you guys would think of.
I mean, Whistledown starts off again with this knowledge that, are we allowed to say who it is yet?
No, I tweeted this ages ago, but like I sometimes during these recordings feel like Mrs. Bennet and just being like, can you please have some consideration for my nerves, by which I mean my like love and respect for chronology. And continuity.
Right, we'll just leave the Whistledown behind.
So,
who's making wink, wink, sly, nudge, nudge comments about Simon's stamina and the couple being private and alone. Although when Simon and Daphne arrive at the house, the housekeeper is not on board with these plans. She has the way that she wants things to be, and it does not include alone time for our couple.
A friend of mine is currently watching Gossip Girl right from the beginning of the series, right? And they were noticing this really interesting thing about the way that Gossip Girl's narration was happening, and that like it could have been really biting satire about like lazy Sundays and then watching wait staff prepare brunch and making this commentary about like, yeah, lazy if you are the rich person that's about to sit down to this lovely meal. You haven't had to do any of the labor. And I thought at first that's what this was going to be doing, and making a comment about like, no one's watching. except they've very clearly got an audience in their staff. But I don't know that the show really
Is that self-aware?
I don't think it actually noticed.
Oh, this is not a thing that they are going to ever worry about.
Any attempt at satire is immediately undercut.
He wouldn't have been able to carry her up and through that house. Why am I even calling it a house?
I knew you were going to say something about that because he was clearly struggling. He didn't have a good grasp on her. He dropped her as soon as they got around the corner. That was like the fourth take, and he was like, "I'm fucking done, guys."
And then we jump back to London. Now, my question is, are they still at... They can't still be at the wedding breakfast.
No.
Well, I kind of thought like maybe it had been a time jump as well as a place jump. Like
we've moved backwards in time.
Yeah, left, and then Colin, after they left, Colin has everybody there. So he's just like, hey, we're engaged. Hooray. And then we see three people look equally stricken. Anthony, Violet, and Penelope.
It did not even occur to me that they would have done that. And there's no good reason why I think that they're at a whole other party.
I'm asking you this question, but I'm not actually interested enough to have actually gone back and looked to see what Marina was wearing and whether she's wearing the same thing from one scene to the next. So it's not, I mean, obviously, clearly I'm idly interested, but not enough to actually do the work to find out the answer for myself. Adele, did you notice if Anthony had a different painting behind him? Because I did not. And then I decided I would not.
No, he had the white horse. He still had the white horse. No, but the one thing that really occurred to me throughout was that this episode was not brought to us by the sex scenes. This episode was brought to us by the scowl that is on Penelope's face throughout. And I really do appreciate Nicola Coughlin's commitment to looking fiercely unattractive throughout this whole episode by just looking the fury.
We know why Penelope is furious and hurt. Anthony and Violet, though, is it just a matter of Colin's age? Are they worried about Marina? Like, she seems to be a really lovely girl and she seemed popular enough. Or is it just that they're going to be related to the Featheringtons from now on, and that was a situation that neither of them were comfortable with? Why do you think they're so upset?
My feeling was about Colin's maturity level. I didn't really feel like it was anti-Marina. I didn't really feel like it was anti-Featherington, although that probably, I mean, you see a little bit of that at the Modiste, but I think it was just concern about Colin. But I feel like a lot of it is kind of being hurt that he hadn't really mentioned this to them and it came out of the blue. Like it does happen really quickly, even in the events of the series.
So if we're accepting that Daphne is 18, then that makes Colin 19 or 20.
Yeah.
So he is really young, and not talking to his family ahead of proposing to someone is very definitely a sign of his immaturity. So, like, I can imagine being disconcerted, but also, like, the level of hurt that they are displaying, it's kind of incongruous with the fact that he has been participating in a season. Like he's shown an interest. The fact that they've not actually asked him anything else about it says just as much about them as it does about him. Like,
also, Violet doesn't have a leg to stand on. Didn't she and Edmund get married super young?
Yeah. So it does a lot of jumping backwards and forwards between these two things of like, Anthony is mad, and then we go back to Simon and Daphne, who are having a lot of sex. No, wait, yes.
First we have the housekeeper making snide remarks all the time.
Yeah, no, you're right. They are having a lot of sex, but yeah, the world intrudes and there is clear tension between Daphne and the housekeeper.
I just feel like the housekeeper is being too snide for Daphne's sins.
from an intensely practical point of view, if the new Duchess rocks up and starts talking about all these changes she wants to make, me as a housekeeper, I would make sure to stay on her side so I'm not the next change on that list.
If she hasn't had a mistress for 30 years, she's been the most powerful woman in that household. But I don't actually think it's a power play for her own power. I actually think it's trying to maintain the memory of Simon's mother, who she was clearly very loyal to. So that softens the edges of it a little bit. But is it acceptable? No.
I mean, I think you have to do way too much work to get to that reading of her. Or at the very least, you have to have, like, you won't get to that reading until like 3/4 of the way through this episode, by which point she spent the earlier 3/4 being kind of a villain.
It's a weird way to drop her in the same way that I think Prince Friedrich is weird, in that they drop this person in who clearly has a role to play but isn't given any character
She's
development.
a plot muppet.
She's absolutely a plot muppet.
Like, yeah.
And it's even more frustrating when I think the reason a lot of the Colin and Marina stuff doesn't work for me is Colin's been given Jack all to do this season. We don't really know who Colin is. He doesn't resemble the Colin from the books, and that's absolutely fine because it has to stand by itself. But there isn't a strong sense of who Colin is, and maybe that is the point, that he doesn't know who he is.
Yeah.
But you still usually have a personality, even if you don't feel like you have a strong hold of your identity.
Whomst among us knows who we are at 20, honestly.
He knows he's a Bridgerton.
All right, so
he's third.
11:55 is when Taylor Swift's wildest dream begins.
So, because it starts at, the only reason I'm pointing this out is immediately before that we have the dinner where Daphne and Simon, as these young, in love and like not like other peers type couple, sit close together at the dinner table.
They move their own chair and carry their own dishes.
I know. And the only reason I'm pointing it out is because later on they have a dinner together and they just, for no reason, there's not even tension with them yet.
I lie. I know I read it. I made the same note, but I do think that there's tension there already. I think it's a metaphor. And it's funny because Adele, you and I had an argument about this off mic, because I was like, it's really interesting that they made this show. And it's very, I know we're going to talk about female gaze a little bit later, but I was like, well, it's an interesting choice that they made where they show Simon's ass all the time, but they never show Daphne's ass or her nipples.
And they do in this one.
They do. And they do. I was like watching this montage really closely because I'm like, I'm going to prove Adele wrong, but then you didn't. You proved me wrong.
No,
At
but I know.
13 minutes and 54 seconds, we get Daphne's nipples.
Oh my God, you so have to win. The reason I went, why did I not know that? And then I realized I watched the first season over a very few hours in a 2-bedroom apartment staying with my brother. So if any sex scene came on, I kind of quickly, I had to mute because I was so embarrassed. And also would not fast, double the speed or something, so I would have missed it. But yeah, you were absolutely correct. But I'm so immature, I couldn't.
There is nipples. There's
nipples.
It's only during one interlude, but we 100% see nipples, and I didn't think that we did through the whole series. So you were right, and I was wrong.
I'm fairly sure that it's in this montage. There is one sex scene that made me laugh super hard because it takes place next to a lake, and it made me think of Colin Firth emerging from the lake in Pride and Prejudice, and I was like, "Is that what are we meant to be drawing that parallel?"
No. What was very clear to me is when at the start of the episode and they arrive at Cliveden, you can see very clearly that the whole staff can see right down to the lake across that green lawn.
Perfect.
And all I could think when I saw that scene is, oh, Anthony's not going to be the exhibitionist in this season, this series. Maybe it's Simon, because there is no like tree cover. The whole staff can see them doing that, and that's different than hearing it through a door.
Mm-hmm.
There are rules.
Anyway, Taylor Swift sings for 3 minutes. I've written down here in my notes, which is about as long as any of these interludes last, apparently.
Well, do you know a lot of people immediately used that orchestration for their walk down the aisle? And I'm like,
no.
It's a sex scene.
So it's pretty.
It is
It
pretty.
is very pretty.
But like,
But
I
I
don't wish
also
that
love-
kind of sex on anybody. Like, Jesus. Foreplay.
I also love the juxtaposition of a lot of people I've seen on TikTok and stuff walking down the aisle to this like super Christian. And I'm like, that's an interesting choice.
It's
Anyway,
actually
moving
no, Adele, it's not an interesting choice because they don't even have sex until they're married. Like this is a very conventional, very like Christian traditional relationship to both
Very
love and
conventional.
sex.
For a modern version of that relationship now, watching this, you might think this is how to have sex, which is 5 pumps and away we go, done.
I mean, if it's the first time that you're having sex, then I don't think that that's necessarily inaccurate. The point is, Simon is
True.
supposed to be a rake who's like been fucking his way across the continent, whoever, to, you know, who knows where.
Really terribly doing it.
Like, Jesus. It's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for him. And also, I don't know what herb she's taking, or I don't know, maybe she just does a lot of Kegels, but like, I don't know how she manages to orgasm so fast. It's impressive. That is an impressive skill.
Sorry. I wrote a note to myself because in our last episode, when we started arguing about whether the sex was satisfying or not, there was, Kate, you brought up the idea that it couldn't have been satisfying, or it possibly was never meant to have been represented as satisfying because they're each holding back certain things from each other, and then was like, we need to come back around to this. And I want to make you come back around to this now that we've got time and we've got multiple sex scenes to discuss.
They're still holding back from each other. Like, they're still, Simon in particular is lying to her, really, and mostly she just doesn't know. Yeah, look, I think in the honeymoon scene, it was very clear that there could have been multiple readings as to why that sex scene went the way that it did. Now that we have our 3-minute Taylor Swift sex montage to bring into the analysis, I think what it is the writers just did a shit poor job of writing sex for this couple. Like, you could have taken the 3 minutes and done a really beautiful and erotic job of a really good sex scene that could have said everything that you needed to say about their growing attachment to each other, you know, how they're building their relationship through physicality, and how their discovery of each other and discovery of joy in each other brings out playfulness. Like, there was a lot that could have been said in a 3-minute sex scene that they could have done really well. Instead, we get I don't even know how many quick pounds and then you're done sex scenes, which, look, they're naked, but they're not sexy. And it's incredibly privileging of penetrative sex as, you know, the point, the only goal, I suppose. We talk a lot about how Bridgerton is a fairy tale, and it is in this fantasy candy colored world, and maybe this is supposed to play into it, that people always have simultaneous orgasms 30 seconds into penetration, and that they don't need anything else, and that there are no other erogenous zones on your body to be explored. It's just as a longtime romance reader, and I don't know, as somebody who enjoys a well-crafted sex scene, this is not that.
I'm just going to say there is at least one look, and I use this term somewhat ironically. There is a gesture towards him fingering her, and there is a gesture towards oral sex. So I am going to say that there's those two, because I feel like I'm always going to be sitting here being like, in the defense of sex in Bridgerton.
It's just, it could be better sex. And
Yeah.
Simon's supposed to be so good at it.
I just feel like they went, we want to see his butt on the lawn. We want to have them vertical at some point and him giving her oral. We definitely need something in the bed. It was like a checklist, and it felt very perfunctory.
I think
the fingering was the hottest thing, though. I think they should have stuck with that. There didn't need to be the penetration. I think that, and staying on her face was brilliant too. Like, trust the actor to do that.
To do the work.
I think that's the closest it got, I think, to being effective for me.
I mean, one of the challenges, and we have talked about this previously, is that they do actually have to show that Simon is consistently not ejaculating inside her. And so, like, because for me, like, I compare this sex montage to 365 Denis. There's a sex montage on that where they have sex all over his yacht, and
the boat.
Yeah, they have sex all over his yacht. His staff is very definitely like also on that yacht, and I feel sad for them. But aside from the explicitness, the difference between that one and this is that one doesn't really have to tell you that they're coming. So it can kind of give you this impression that the sex is lasting longer than the scene you're seeing. Whereas this, by actually showing you at the very least he is coming, it implies that that's the duration.
No, you're so right, because sex scenes should tell you something. It should always be a reflection of where the characters are at that point in the relationship, and it should be a forward momentum in their time together. But all those scenes are about ejaculation.
I think that it actually tells us a lot about Simon, and might actually at least nod to the point that I was making before, whether it can't have really satisfying sex because he's lying to her. Because every time that he withdraws, he like throws himself away from her and turns away from her. Like, she knows literally nothing about sex. He could be coming anywhere he wanted, but he's always like literally turned away, his back to her, his face away from her every time that he finishes. So I think that we are seeing something about Simon where he's not only withholding her chance of having a baby, but he's withholding a significant part of himself as well.
This is fascinating. Yeah, like why isn't he coming on her leg or her belly?
Yeah. Or even like a handkerchief in his hand, but still staying close to her. He's not. He's throwing himself away from her. God, the number of handkerchiefs they must have to wash.
My mind is blown right now. I'm going to need a minute. But while I just like process, I'm going to also, I don't know if you remember what it was that you were talking about, but you referenced there's a trope that you hate that has to do with what we're talking about.
I can't remember what the trope was that I hate.
I wonder if it was that it was the focus on penetrative sex as the only legitimate sex.
Well, actually, there's a couple of tropes that really just grind my gears
around like sex and truth.
Yeah. So, well, not only that, but more like you can't have good sex unless you're having sex with like your one true love.
I reckon that's probably the one that you were thinking of in that moment.
Which is, I mean, it goes back to Daphne's magical hoo-ha, I guess, because Daphne's only ever had sex with one person, so what does she know? Whereas Simon, and I mean, the thing about Daphne as well is that she doesn't know her body really. She's had dabblings in masturbation, but certainly hasn't felt free enough to, I suppose, to really explore what makes her feel good and talk about what she wants in bed. It's very much about him being all like, I know your body better than you. I shall take care of you, which is the underlying trope in 50 Shades of Grey, which I also hated.
What I find disappointing is with its focus on Simon's character. What are they telling us about Daphne's character through the sex scenes?
One thing that develops with her character is that she does become more comfortable with sex, because, like, if you go back to that initial thing, like her initially arriving at Cliveden and saying like, oh no, we can't possibly take a tour of the bedroom right now, what will the servants think? And then by the end of this montage, he is like, he's performing oral sex and is like, I can't remember what he says, but he says something about what will the servants think? And she says she doesn't care, and then they like continue. She gets more comfortable as the scenes progress. It is it is interesting that, like you guys say, suddenly she's really into public sex. Then we jump back to breakfast at the Bridgertons, and that's when
Colin is his best angsty teenage self. No one understands me. No one takes me seriously. No one really gets me except Marina. And I'm like, I would have slapped Colin at that point in time, so I admire Violet's fortitude. It's interesting in this next scene that Penelope is being framed here as like the moral one, and everyone else is set up to look at how the situation benefits them. And I thought it was a really interesting little twist when one of her sisters, I don't remember which one, said, oh, I completely forgot that the child wasn't his. Like, she had just sort of seen them together as a couple and gone with it. And I think it was an interesting way of how an interesting representation, I think, of how the ton would have been like, meh, they're married. Who cares if the baby came along in 7 months and just moved on? Like, everybody would have forgotten. And then you have Penelope stewing in the background, being holier than thou with her. I can't believe she's trapping him in this way. From
this engagement, the Featheringtons, and Lady Featherington in particular, now feels comfortable going to the modiste, and like they've been told that they basically can't show up until they're ready to pay. And she knows she still can't actually pay, but she's got like a little bit of like social cachet now that she's ready to kind of deploy. And so we have this interesting scene between Marina and Genevieve where Marina realizes that Genevieve has been lying about her French origins and effectively like threatens to out her.
Question, Kate, was Marina's accent any good?
It wasn't terrible. I did feel like this was an unrealistic way of catching Genevieve, like to have not even considered which part of France she would be from, and like to be caught on the back foot with that question seems out of character for how shrewd we've seen Genevieve be in the past. And like, granted, everything that Marina was saying was correct, and it, she was asking the right questions or whatever. But I think that it was a little bit too easy to dupe Genevieve into doing what they wanted. I don't think that Genevieve has proven herself to be that dupable in the past.
This episode's all about putting Marina in the villain shoes, basically.
I don't think it puts her in the villain shoes. I think it just goes to show exactly how shrewd she can be. And
I actually don't think she's a villain. I've just read a lot of women hate Marina. This episode doesn't help.
I mean, I think you have to realize that Marina is fighting for her life here.
Yeah.
And she's doing it with all of the tools at her disposal. And she happens to have really good tools at her disposal.
Let's go back to the country.
Back to Cliveden. We're at a fair.
When I was watching it the first time, this scene got me really mad. And it's because Daphne's a country girl. Why would she be squicked out by the idea of like pigs going to slaughter? It made no sense to me. Is Daphne a vegetarian?
Well, and I mean, it's not like farm to table was an unusual concept at that time. Like the pig shows up on the table looking like a pig. It's not sanitized into a deli counter. So
in her defense, she's not told the full meaning of who wins. She did ask what happens if you win.
Did she think that maybe the pig would be slaughtered and that was it? Like, it was just going to be killed in punishment of being the best pig at the fair?
To be fair to Daphne, she's not thinking at that moment at all. She's on a date in the sunshine with her husband, and she's full of joy and lots of really good orgasms, and the only thing she wants to do is make everybody feel as good as she feels at that moment, and that means making all the farmers win. Like, she's just thoughtless as opposed to...
Yeah, because I mean, you would choose a winner to show that you were decisive and you had good decision-making skills, like if I was doing that. But then I've never stood next to Simon, so yeah.
Anyway, while we're at the fair, our second plot muppet of the episode comes barreling in. Little Ada.
Ada.
Just in case we'd forgotten that there was some kind of issue about children.
Can I just point out that crying children don't run to strangers?
No, they do not.
There's also a really strange extra throughout this scene. It's a guy and he's sort of behind the woman who's pregnant. And I guess it's maybe supposed to be her husband. I don't know. But it's just this guy that keeps staring at them, like, kind of, like, is weird. Anyway, I don't know why I noticed that.
It was very much and entirely a plot muppet. But I thought that was a really lovely scene, actually. It was beautifully shot with the sunset and the two of them walking through the field. But to have that discussion about being happy with who they are and being happy with the choices that had been made and just the two of them, I thought it was nice. I thought it was a nice emotional scene that kind of did what all of that sex scenes were supposed to be doing, but they did it instead in this way.
But I guess it also gives us insight into how Daphne is rationalizing the sacrifice she has chosen in marrying Simon. She's incredibly happy. She feels in love. She is, choosing to focus on the nephews and nieces that she will have. She's trying to make the best of a situation that's not 100% what she would have wanted.
She's recognizing that she'll still have children in her life.
Okay, and then on to the dinner with the Bridgertons.
I'm going to skip the dinner because everybody was just being grumpy and horrible. But we skip to like the after dinner entertainment where we have Prudence and Philippa entertaining, and I'm using scare quotes here, the guests. And I wanted to know if you guys thought that this was the Smith-Smythe musicale.
I actually wrote that down.
I wonder if it is a replacement.
Bless Bessie Carter for being horrific in her singing. It's so bad.
I kind of, watching these two kind of moments happen, I kept thinking, like, am I supposed to actually empathize with Penelope? Because everything about the way that Marina is talking to Colin, where she's talking about, my father doesn't want me, the Featheringtons don't want me, your family don't want me, the heartache that she is displaying in that moment. I have no words. And I kept thinking, like, clearly they're prepared to have bad acting and bad singing, like bad performance in this. Am I supposed to believe that Marina is a truly fucking great actress? Or is she genuinely having these emotions? Because I felt like she was genuinely having those emotions. And
you thought she was sincere?
Yes.
Really? I thought that she was just
I read it as
truly
manipulation.
amazing in terms of moving the situation forward. I mean, every good liar begins in truth, right? So
exactly. That's what I was thinking too. She used what was true and just like turned it up to 11.
I knew that I was probably going to be in a minority in believing in this moment. But part of my reasoning is the fact that they will have bad singing to show us that this is someone who is incapable of singing but is clearly like trying and thinks that they are good. And like, I thought, oh, Marina is not meant to be an actress. This is a moment where everything is stripped away, and this is her truest moment.
I would have maybe felt more that way inclined if I hadn't seen the scene with Mrs. Featherington earlier in the episode.
And I might have felt more similarly inclined, but if she hadn't gone all the way to the end with, I would never have to be out of your arms again, which put it over the top for me.
Maybe I'm a sucker like Colin, but I believe her. Also, the further into the series we get, the more decidedly anti-Penelope I become. Like,
Well, yeah.
This episode in particular, I just was like, do you know what? Not my fave. Don't like you.
She's horrible in this episode. She really is.
Rudy,
Yeah.
if Marina does come to you suggesting you get engaged, can you just talk to us first? We have a few things we want to just talk to you about before you agree to anything.
No one takes me seriously the way that Marina does. Okay, like it just. And
have you really watched her swish in her dress, though? I mean, I really want you to check out.
Oh my god, that was so good. I love that so much. Like,
I totally missed that was the episode title. Wow.
All right, speaking of dresses, we'll move back to Daphne. No, because I love this dress. This is my favorite dress, and I was. Is it the
little purple flowers? Yes! I wrote down the little purple flowers. Sorry.
I loved it, and I want it. And I was like idly Googling dressmakers earlier today. Part of my ongoing thing about them not being able to have good sex is because they don't really know each other. And they're deliberately only knowing each other on one level. This is the first time that Daphne learns anything about Simon's history. Anything at all. She knows literally nothing about him. Not about his parents, not about his childhood, not about where he's been for the last 10 years. Literally nothing about him. It takes a housekeeper to say, oh, his mom died in childbirth and his dad lived in London all the time. And this is all new information to Daphne.
There's also, at this point in the episode, there's been 2 instances where he's quite dismissive of her when she tries to either help him or know more about him. And he brushes her off quite aggressively. He does it 3 times in this episode. So he's very interested in her when it's about a pounding. But when it's about the tenants or actually having some moments of communication, he shuts down, just like he turns away during the sex scenes. He's actually maintaining some really stiff boundaries. Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
You are a child.
We love that about you. I actually really liked watching Simon get thoroughly engaged with his roles as the Lord of the Manor and looking after his tenants. I actually found him more attractive because he was really engaged and he was researching and he was literally trying to make things better and find answers and take care of people and not just moping around and drinking and brooding all the time. When he got all active and like interested in his responsibilities, I was like, oh, okay.
It really pissed me off that he had neglected that, because that doesn't necessarily track with who we think he is.
He's only just returned to England at the start of this series, right? And he's only newly become the Duke of Hastings. So he's neglected it for a handful of, like, weeks, maybe 2 months. It's not great, but it's also that thing of, like, the steward that was overseeing things is the same person that was... Oh, he came home when his dad was dying, because doesn't he like literally whisper his vow over his dying father, and then his dying father dies.
You're right. Actually, I got
yeah.
that timeline mixed up, because when we first see him, Lady Danbury says, "I'm sorry about the passing of your father." So it's only been a couple of months that he's been brooding and moping.
Sorry, just because this is just occurring to me now. Isn't it fascinating that he really should have been in mourning and not a single person, like, clocks him for that?
Yeah, true.
Like,
they must have all hated his dad.
He does what he wants. He can't be controlled.
Yeah, but also, like, surely Daphne would have had questions about, like, didn't your dad, like, just die? Like, you're supposed to not be out among society as much and blah, blah. It's a whole thing. But, like...
Well, Simon actively tries to stay out of society. It's just that Lady Danbury keeps making him go into it.
I just realized I created a bit, like, a deeper Hastings family history in the back of my head, because when I saw that very large estate, and we know that Simon's father was gifted that estate by the king and queen, but we also hear during the Housekeeper's tour that it was given to an admiral, I believe, for services for the Queen and King, I think, 100 years prior. So maybe, well, one, Simon's dad seems a bit of a dick, but two, maybe the shift of household ownership put Simon's family in a bit of a deficit in terms of the ton. But I mean, none of that's present, but that's what my brain's doing in the background.
While Simon is off trying to find better seeds, Daphne is also talking seeds with the housekeeper and then with her maid. This is the start of what I called through my entire notes, Daphne does science.
I just want to pause on the idea that this housekeeper, who does not like her and has been very hostile, is suddenly very willing to spill secrets and intimate family details. Like, God, I laughed.
So they also have set up a little bit. She's quite chatty about Simon's mother and is quite loyal to her. So I think,
but surely the loyalty means that she's going to keep her secrets.
Apparently not. Apparently all Daphne has to do is simper a little bit and flatter her, and she is willing to talk about all the things.
There's the presence of the Charlotte cake.
Suddenly, a little bit of Charlotte cake, and all of a sudden I'm ready to tell you, well, as I told her. Oh my God. Yeah. Back in London, Penelope fakes being ill so that she can go snooping.
But we need to take a second for Lady Featherington's teal gown. It was the second lot of dress envy that I had while watching this episode. And now we can transition to Penny. The thing about Penny going into Marina's room is I don't know why she was there. Like, she'd already told Colin that Marina was in love with somebody else and that she'd seen their love letters. Like, what was she hoping to find? The only thing I could think of was that maybe she was going to, like, find one of the love letters to show Colin to, like, try and get him to take it seriously.
Yeah, probably that.
But there really wasn't any reason for Penelope to be snooping in Marina's room. Like, she's
probably just looking for dirt.
I very much appreciated that once Marina recognizes the threat of having these letters, she decides to fucking burn them and does it right in Penelope's face.
Yeah,
like,
just
yep.
takes care of the evidence. Well, it's interesting because in this whole scene, like, I loved this monologue from Marina. And I think this is the point where history and having read the books tells me that I'm supposed to be on Penelope's side, but I was very much not on Penelope's side during this scene.
Yeah.
Like, Marina is absolutely right. She is more mature than Penny. She is the person that Colin sees as a woman as opposed to a younger sister. She does have to do the best thing for herself and for her child. And she, you know, and she says, you know, I'm going to be a good wife. Colin is not going to regret marrying me. I'm never going to make him unhappy. You need to get over it.
If I am to be the executioner of a childhood infatuation, so be it. Your love is an unrequited fantasy. Like, that's savage. Like, but it's also what the situation called for, because it was a girl trying to hold on to this fantasy and Marina trying to be pragmatic and get on with her future and make the best of it.
It's almost like she's trying to do Penny a favor. Like, this is never going to happen. It's only going to hurt you the longer that it goes on. You need to stop it so it can't hurt you anymore.
Yeah.
I think also, like, because, look, it is a very cutting thing to have said, and it's a very blunt way to put it. But I think also, like, the fact that she has let so many of Penelope's jabs slide, like, you would be at a point where you're going to be that blunt. Okay, desk sex.
Always with the kissing and then the penetration and then the coming in the course of like 18 seconds.
She can't have been wet.
You guys are taking these sex scenes so literally, and they are really only metaphorical.
More Daphne does science. Like, she's got her hypothesis, and now she's like doing the different steps to the experiment.
But that also shows how comfortable he was getting, like, in not hiding it better in that circumstance. He's very blasé for someone who's been turning his whole body aside for all the other scenes prior.
Well, and I mean, it also speaks to how much he's taking advantage of her lack of knowledge. He's never, ever going to tell her what he's doing or why he's doing it. And he just assumes that she's never going to find out.
The main difference between this sex scene and any of the others previously is that suddenly there's no music. It is just the atmospheric sound of that scene. You're just in it, and it's very real and very uncomfortable.
Which is why when we go to the next scene where they're sitting at the opposite ends of the dinner table again, I don't think that that's out of place. I think Daphne has already started to put emotional distance between her and Simon because she's starting to figure out what's happening.
I'm realizing that I misspoke, and what I meant is that the fact that he's not clocking it as weird is weird to me.
Fucking oblivious. Like, he knows something's wrong.
He doesn't though.
I don't think he does either. Like, I really think that he is living his best life. He feels, you know, he's fulfilled by his work as the Lord of the Manor. He's solved some problems, so he's feeling really good. He has a hot girl in his bed every night who's as into him as he is. He's sorted out the whole, like, fucking over his father thing, and he's just like, hell yeah, I've got this all down.
Because he's sitting there at that table just like telling her about his wonderful day and how well he's doing in life and expecting her to be very like happy for him, and not noticing that she's back at the other end of the table and kind of not actually talking either.
Do better, Simon. Do better.
Well, this is the thing. I think this is where in this episode we see the limits of where Simon's character growth has got to. Like, he's obviously taken steps forward in his character growth and forward in his emotional intelligence, but he's not anywhere near where he needs to be. He's taken some steps, but then he stops, and he stops at this point where Daphne's upset, but he's really happy, so he doesn't notice. And things are, you know, Daphne is out of bed in the morning, and he's like, whatever, my life is great.
But he's also probably never had this proximity to another person before. Like, he's just used to doing what works for him without having to have the EQ about dealing with that stuff. Like, he's had a very solitary life.
There were a couple of things that I noticed in this scene because, like, we've acknowledged that it is a sign of bad times to come, right? They're sitting at opposite ends of the table. He's talking about how wonderful his life is, and she's not really paying attention, and he's not noticing that she's not paying attention. Also, the pig is, like, placed on the table, which we kind of brushed past it, but she has finally solved the problem of not choosing a winner meant that, like, there was no one that was given that contract, and now she has chosen someone to win the contract. All of this is a return to status quo of, like, societal norms of the world, right? So, like, all of this is a return to conventional marriage, but everything about The Duke and I as a book, like as a whole book, is a story of conforming to societal norms. Like we discussed with the Rachel Matisse, like romances of liberation or romances of conformity. This is like The Duke and I, Julia Quinn specializes in conformity. So when they are conforming and it is going wrong, there's something interesting that happens. Either, like, the show creators don't have a good grasp on what story they're trying to tell and what point they're trying to make, which is probably what is actually happening, or they're making a way more interesting point of the conformity is bad and has always been bad, and this is The Duke and I has always needed work. I don't think that's what they're trying to do. I think that it's actually just they've accidentally made that point, which is a valid point, and it's true.
What I think is happening here is that they have reached a level of conformity in terms of their professional lives, for want of a better word. Like, Daphne is kicking her own goals with the village, and Simon is obviously doing his thing, but they haven't achieved conformity in their personal lives in terms of
having a baby.
The next step, having a baby. The next step, right? You get married and then you have a baby. So they're not happy, and there's that distance because they haven't fully conformed yet. They've taken a step towards conformity, but are not actually all the way there.
I've never hated my own point so much.
I'm sorry, but it's your point. I mean, you're
right. Yeah.
I'm just mirroring it back.
I was going to say, you just like actually explained it slightly better and like, and with a more holistic approach, and fuck. Okay. Well, now that that's happened, look, I quite love that this is like broadly being spoken about by fans and critics alike as the scene or that scene. And like everyone knows that this is the one that we're talking about. So we're up to the scene.
First, can we talk a little bit about the music?
Yes. Definitely.
So I Shazammed it, and it's a song called The End, which I thought was really interesting. And it's by a performer who has a lot of consonants altogether in their name. So I think it's supposed to be Japoland, but I'm not entirely sure. It was like a mashup of Japan and Poland, but also with no vowels. So it made it hard for me to figure out how to say that out loud.
That's what show notes are for. It's fine.
Yeah. Because it's interesting that they didn't have music at all during stage 2 of Daphne's science experiment. And now they went hard on the music, and they like the music that they chose is incredibly evocative, and it's like there's nothing subtle about this. They are absolutely trying to show that something very significant and very dark is about to happen.
It's also the first non-diegetic song we've had that has lyrics. Like, that was really jarring. I think everything about this scene is supposed to feel a little bit jarring and a little bit uncomfortable and off.
I mean, they're going through dark hallways and stairwells with a lantern, for fuck's sake. Like, they're actually going upstairs, but it's like they're going into hell.
Like, this whole scene is absolutely Daphne led. Like, she knows exactly what she's doing. And I think it's interesting to see her from the beginning of the episode, when she's really shy, to now when she knows how to seduce Simon. Like, she pulls her hair out and shakes it out. She pulls the top of her dress down to just above her breast. Like, she knows what Simon likes, what entices and excites him, and she's doing everything she possibly can to get him into a frenzy.
I know there's been a lot of people that have had arguments or whatever about whether this scene constitutes rape or not. And like, I will say, as far as the Australian Netflix ratings go, it's rated MA 15 plus for, among other things, sexual violence. And I was like, oh, okay, they're like, at the very least, our rating system is very clear on the fact that this is non-consent. Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's an experiment or proof of a theory. It's still not about intention. It's about the loss of agency that Simon has and body autonomy. So it is rape.
Because we do analysis on all the scenes of Bridgerton, and because we like to unpack things and look at things from different angles and talk about it, I think before we get into this conversation that we all have to say, like, we're going to have a discussion about this scene. None of us think that it's okay. All of us agree that it's a scene that not only shouldn't have happened within the story, but was unnecessary as part of the setup of the show as well. It was deliberate sexual violence that could have been avoided in many different ways, and that its inclusion in a series that came out in 2020, particularly after what we've learned about from the Me Too movement, and particularly after the conversations that are ongoing about what consent looks like and what that means. And as a society, we're starting very slowly to try and dismantle rape culture. This scene was not only unnecessary, but it was violent in its inclusion for the viewers as well as the people in the scene.
I think what I would like to start with is, does she have the right to feel humiliated? Undoubtedly. To be mad, to be confused, to feel betrayed, all of those things, absolutely. That does not justify the choices that she made. But it's not one or the other. She can be completely right and completely wrong in her action.
The problem is that all of us are really well versed in these conversations, and I think that we're generally thoughtful people. And it's hard to put those concepts into Daphne when she hasn't been that person throughout the whole series.
Yeah.
So for me, I don't think that Daphne set out to try and get herself pregnant from the situation. I really think that she just had this idea in her head. She was learning things and she was trying to figure it out. And this was the last step of figuring out something that she was suspecting. She's being driven only by her base emotions in terms of she wants to have a child. She loves Simon. Simon knows she wants to have a child. Is Simon lying to her? And this is the way to find out. Well, this is the way that she comes up with to find out if he's lying to her.
Well, she gathers information beforehand. She goes to Rose and uses the word specifically, I think, to tell the specifics of how one gets pregnant. So she does reconnaissance first. I don't know if I agree with you, Kate, because of a directing choice. In the moment that she's having sex with Simon, and her consensual at this point, because you can change your mind, she's on her back and looking up, and she looks directly into camera before she does the switch.
The framing of it reminded me of a lot of the discourse. I didn't actually watch Game of Thrones. I've seen like one episode, but I remember there being a lot of discussion about a rape scene that happens in the Game of Thrones. There's a scene that was discussed quite a lot about, I want to say, Jaime raped Cersei. Are they brother and sister? Yeah, right.
Oh yeah, at their son's funeral.
Sure. So, in a lot of the discourse about that scene, something that kept coming up was that throughout they deliberately victimize Cersei by shooting her from above so that you are seeing her face through this whole ordeal. And there have been other examples of rape scenes where they've like effectively swung the camera around and done it the other way around. So you're seeing the perpetrator's face. Having just a few years ago had that whole kind of discourse, that then when this scene happens, they've done the same thing. They've shot from above and we're getting Simon's face. Like it is very much like he's being victimized both by Daphne and by the camera, and we are supposed to some degree recognize that, but it has put us in the uncomfortable situation of being
the rapist.
being Daphne. And I wonder what impact, knowing they've got a predominantly female audience and knowing that they're about to do a scene that has been discussed a lot by romance reading community about the fact that it's rape, but it is, in the books, it was kind of coming from a particular context of publishing and rape in romance and the inclusion of it and then the subversion of it. Like there is something there. And again, like this is one of those moments where I'm just like, I just don't know if they had the knowledge, the grounding, the capacity to pull off what they've attempted.
Yeah, it's a question of like, am I able to see Daphne's point of view because I've been manipulated into it because of the camera angles and because I've been made into Daphne?
I think it purposely encourages you to empathize with her.
Also with the use of wait instead of no.
Or stop.
Yep. Which is, you sit there and you're like, they have checked in with each other in other sex scenes previously. Like they're a very verbal couple. Like it just, the longer I sit with this scene, the more questions I have about it.
This sex scene lasts so much longer than the other sex scenes that we've seen in any other context of their relationship. And it starts as most of their sex scenes start, in Missionary. And then she flips over to be on top. And if you watch Simon during this, like he's genuinely surprised and really turned on by it. I think it might be the first time that they've had sex with her on top like that. But even though she flipped him over so that she could be on top, we've seen him pick her up and throw her around throughout the course of, like in this episode, we've seen that happen.
They've been seeding that idea from the start. Like we've had multiple instances where Simon, when he has struggled with his words, has been very capable in his physicality. So like they definitely want you to draw that parallel and they want you to have that thought. I just think that, and this is not at you, but like generally speaking, it's a cop out.
Like, why didn't he fight harder?
Yeah, like that's effectively
Yeah.
what they're asking
Yeah.
viewers to say, and unfortunately some people will say.
There's also a key change that's been made between the incident in the book and the incident in the series, which is in the book, he was incredibly intoxicated, which could have inhibited his strength, which I think it does in the book. But that doesn't matter anyway, because consent. So,
I mean, even in the book, though, like
Yeah.
he makes that choice to get drunk and they also sleep beforehand. Like, it's not like he's totally, and he initiated the sex. Like, there are things
I
I still
yeah.
don't think that the book is good, but I think the book was doing something very specific that doesn't translate into a 2020 audience.
One of the biggest differences between the book scene and this scene here, and one of the reasons why, again, just want to be very clear that it's not okay, but one of the things that I think that the people in the production behind the scenes made choices to try and improve the scene, make it better, I guess, make it more palatable, is that in the book, Daphne very much thinks he's asleep, he's intoxicated, I can take what I want right now, and he won't be able to stop me. That's not what Daphne is doing in this scene necessarily. She's not thinking, I'm going to take advantage of him while he is incapacitated to get what I want. She's thinking, I think he's lying to me. How can I go about proving that?
I mean, we're assuming that that's the thought process. We don't actually have an
we
internal
haven't
monologue
seen
this
the script.
time.
We actually, yeah. I mean, you could have just asked him, Daphne. You could have just asked him.
You could have just asked him. I know.
And they and because if they have a big blow up fight, it amounts to the same thing. If it was actually Simon who was the one in control, if he is the one who like he didn't pull out in time, you know, like he got his timing wrong, which absolutely, but also the pull out method notoriously unreliable.
Mm-hmm.
If she had found herself pregnant and then goes to him and is happy and look at this miracle, they have the same fight and it amounts to the same thing. It's just that there's no consent issue on the table.
Yeah, he gets really overexcited and doesn't, just in the spur of the moment decides to finish inside her or whatever, and then beats himself up about it afterwards. Like, there's so many different ways that they could have explored this exact same emotional betrayal without having the consent issue on the table.
She could have just asked him, but the reason she didn't ask him is, one, they aren't known to communicate particularly well. Secondly, Simon doesn't talk about anything personal. But thirdly, if you're thinking the worst case situation here is that she thought she had one chance to get pregnant and she was just putting off that conversation by, let's be honest, this is probably being generous, but 5 minutes.
So when we were talking about the book version of this, we got a little bit into discussing and kind of clarifying that this is quite specifically reproductive coercion. So it is forcing somebody to have a child with you when you have not agreed to that. It's things like tampering with contraception, removing condoms in the middle of sex without actually getting agreement from your partner, stuff like that. There is a reader that I follow on Twitter. She was talking about the fact that overwhelmingly in romance novels where there is some form of dubious consent or non-consent that happens between the main couple, if it's a man that is being raped, it is for some form of reproductive coercion. Like, it is almost always about the woman wanting to have a baby and him not wanting to, and that's the tension. Whereas, like, when those sorts of scenes happen and it is a woman who is being victimized, it's rarely for that reason. I thought that was a really interesting thing to have picked up on, and like, it's been months and I have not been able to forget about it. So I don't know what I want to do with that other than put it in other people's brains, because I thought that it was really clever.
And I think this is one of those situations where romance has a long history and it sometimes gets in its own way, with this idea that the baby is the end goal. Like, the baby is a physical manifestation of the people's love for each other, and it's proof that they're going to be together forever, etc., which means that there's a level of mental gymnastics that means that kind of reproductive coercion is justified because we're reading romance novels, so we know that everything is going to work out well in the end. And so there's this idea that, okay, well, it's justified that she's doing that because she knows better than he does what's going to make him happy. And it's all going to be okay because we know, because we're reading romance novels, that they will be a happy family at the end, and that it will, in fact, have been the right thing for him. She knows better than he does, etc., etc.
I wonder if there's something in there about the idea that, like, and again, this is probably unintentional, but I do wonder if there's something about the idea that men can't be taken advantage of sexually. Yeah, so the only way to take advantage of them in one of these scenarios is for procreative purposes, which is really fucked up. Like, that's a twisted and very incorrect thought. But like,
well, it's this idea that, like, once the couple start having sex, they never ever say no. Like, if you read romance novels as often as we all do, you'll know that once they start having sex, they always have sex. Like, it's never approached and then pushed back for any reason. So once you've clicked over the not having sex to having sex meter, there's no opportunity to take advantage of anybody, because everybody always wants to have sex, right? It's only in the beginning stages that this kind of coercion or the dubious consent comes into play. So it's harder to say, oh, well, she's taking advantage of him, because they're already ticked over into the always having sex part.
The assumed.
If we flipped this gender-wise, there would be fucking outrage.
I mean, yes and no.
Right?
It would come down to, like, different audiences. And look, we've not really talked about this properly, but there's a racial element to them as an interracial couple. And the fact that it's a white woman and a black man means that if you flip this, it is saying something very specific, but also by keeping it the way that it is playing into some very awful tropes.
It deeply unsettles me, some of the choices that this series has made without really going deeper. And I do appreciate that there is representation in the writer's room, but there is something missing. And as happy as I am to see announcements for season 2, casting and whatnot, I'm not sure if I feel that the actors are in safe hands.
There is a really great, like, video essayist that I've been watching a little bit of recently, and her name is, I think it's Khadija. I'm going to put a link, Kate is going to put a link in our show notes so that people can find this video. But something that she mentioned that has also been in the back of my mind is, like, at the end of the day, Regé-Jean is fairly light-skinned, and I just I'm wondering how popular the Duke of Hastings might have been if he was darker and marrying this bird-like white woman. You know, like it concerns me.
I think with this regard, like in this regard, I think we're seeing the same thing that we see with the characterization of Marina, in that it's like the showrunners said, we're going to do, I can never remember their word for it. It's not colorblind. It was color something.
It's color conscious casting.
I think the thing that the writers, well, what the showrunners did with this, with their idea of color conscious casting, is that they cast characters and created new characters so that from a visual standpoint, the show itself was a lot more inclusive and just, but they didn't bother to carry that energy in to the writing.
Let's move past that scene and go to...
So Simon ends up finishing inside of Daphne, and then she sort of springs off him and takes her and dresses, and he stutters. He says, "What have you done?" And then she mirrors back to him, "What have you done?" And we get into this blowout of an argument. And I think, Adele, what you said earlier actually is very true here, in that they're both right and they're both very wrong in this argument, or at least unable to admit or unwilling to admit at this point the role that they both played in the argument and in the sense of betrayal and lying that's happening right now.
He said she didn't. He thought she knew.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
Oh, I suppose she does have to like specifically ask him, does that hurt? And like he has to explain, no, it feels as good as when you do it. So, okay, you're right.
Yeah.
I just automatically want to be on his side because I just... Yeah.
Well, it's this thing as well where he's very much like, my life is perfect. And it's the kind of, I think it's an insight into the lies he's been telling himself and the delusions that he's been telling himself in order to maintain this my life is perfect outlook and continue to do the things that he wants to do without having to think about anyone else.
His life has never been perfect. Of course, he's holding on to this. So that's the betrayal of what she did from his point of view. So, of course, he stuttered. But that doesn't mean he also was completely right as well.
No, I mean, he was really wrong, but for him, he's gone from a place of safety to a place that's unsafe. And his stutter indicates that.
Do we want to go walking with Eloise and Penelope, which I wrote down foreplay and then 2 exclamation points.
I wrote down
that you don't deserve that hug. Fuck off.
Oh, I wrote Penelope heads to the only person who loves her.
I'm going to ask a lighthearted question because we've just been through some really tough shit. How often do you reckon Penelope has gone for a midnight hang out in the garden with Eloise, who is known for sitting in the garden and smoking and...
She's waiting for Peg every time.
I don't think so. Because every time she is absolutely shocked about being caught with a cigarette and she tries to hide it immediately. If she was waiting for Penelope, she would have been like, well, whatever, man, you share the smoke with me and we can both be modern women who smoke and talk about feminist things.
Yeah, she's shocked at being caught by Benedict, who walks from the house as opposed
from
to
the other direction.
So it's the wrong direction. But how often do you reckon she sits there waiting for her absolutely platonic best friend to...
Her best friend, the last person she wants to see before she goes to bed at night.
Exactly. But also, look, I'm committed to the idea that in the Bridgerton universe, walking is foreplay. So, Penelope's little walk over to the garden at night to meet up with Eloise, Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this seems to be a very upsetting one. She's heartbroken.
Yeah.
She's just been like, she's had that really like intense conversation with Marina, but like
the way Penelope talks about Marina and Colin this episode, is she trying to protect Colin, or is she trying to protect this unrequited vision of her future?
Oh, 100% her future. I think that this episode was much better done than the previous two have been in terms of the way that they're telling the story. But one of the things that I think that they nailed is the voiceover here at this last part, where they're putting these three Machiavellian women in concert with each other. And I think that the juxtaposition of that under that beautiful voiceover from Lady Whistledown about whether the ends ever justify the means it's extraordinarily well done, because not only is it extraordinarily relevant to each of those three characters and their current plot lines that they're on, but this kind of Machiavellian decision making, this kind of single-mindedness determination isn't something that we normally see applied to women. And we have it applied here. 1, 2, 3, all three of these women have gone after what they wanted with single-minded determinedness, not really thinking about the consequence. And, you know, obviously the story is going to unfold a little bit further on. And I think that the writing here and the direction here is just really, really quality storytelling.
Yeah. Is there anything else that happens in this episode, or are we done?
we're technically done, but we also have to do
What would Danbury do?
This week's letter comes from Etienne from Bonds of Brass by Emily Skrutsky.
Dear Lady Danbury, 7 years ago, the Umber Empire invaded my homeland and left me an orphan. Since then, I've done what I have to do to survive, including living on the streets, and recently I joined the Umber Military Academy. Look, things happen and I'm fine. I've got a decent life, I get to fly, and I've got a best friend in my infuriatingly good-looking and chronically under-organised roommate, Gal. But it turns out that Gal has been hiding an enormous secret from everyone, including me. And in trying to protect my best friend, I've managed to betray my homeland and get myself some super powerful enemies. Now we're on the run, and it is really not the time to find out that he's always found me as attractive as I've found him. He's heir to the most powerful empire in the galaxy, and I'm a street kid. He has to make a political marriage. I'm just powerless. So I guess my question is there any reason to hope that this Cinderella story might work out, or should I recognise reality and try to save myself the heartache when he inevitably takes his throne?
Can I just say that I love this book? It's so good.
You can definitely say that. All right, I've been thinking, and I have recently come to the realisation that I don't particularly like Cinderella stories. But we're channeling Lady Danbury, so I'm going to remind myself that it's not about what I want, it's about what she would say. Mm-hmm. And I think that Lady Danbury recognises the value of marrying up, so to speak. That said, in my Rudy feelings, I just want to say that, like, you definitely do need to talk to Gal about why he's been keeping this secret from you, his best friend. And like maybe kind of reconcile, like see if the answer is worthy of like continuing, like building on that trust, building on that relationship, taking things further. Because if it's a bit of like a shit answer, like you kind of already you kind of get a clue about whether it's worth whether he's going to like ditch you the second he's got to actually like take the throne.
The bottom line is that nobody knows what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah.
And even if this relationship doesn't end in like marriage or whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship won't be successful or that it won't be meaningful. And if you've already caught feelings, and he's already caught feelings, then you're already there. it's not going to be a fling. It's obviously going to be meaningful, and all relationships face problems. And sure, your problems are galactic, but, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're insurmountable. Love is a gift. So to walk away from
I
it
thought love was
feels-
an open door.
Love is an open door as well.
Love is a battlefield. Love is many things.
Yeah. So, you know, if
It's a many splendid thing.
yeah.
Love lifts up where we belong. Anyway, it is making me think of. Did you guys read any of the Jesse Malik
Yes.
series? So it's giving me that, and it's also giving me Ava Harper kind of.
I haven't read Ava Harper, but now I'm going to read her
Ooh.
immediately because I love Jesse Malik and I loved this book.
I loved Jesse Malik and I loved Ava Harper, and now I think I might love Emily. I'm going to learn to say your last name. Off air.
Thank you to Jesse for this recommendation. A very timely letter given the theme of secrets and betrayals of the Bridgerton episode that we talked about as well. This is a fantastic book with a slow burn romance, lots of action, a found family, and a genuinely shocking twist. If you too would like to send a thinly veiled book recommendation in the form of a letter, we would love to hear from you. Just take a voice memo of your letter and email it to us at bridgertonpod@gmail.com.
That's all for this episode of What Would Danbury Do? We'll be back in a fortnight to discuss episode 7, Oceans Apart. If you haven't followed our new Instagram account, you can do so at www.ddpod. You can still find us on Twitter at BridgertonPod. Send us an email at bridgertonpod@gmail.com or join the conversation #WWDDpod. You can also leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. People who write reviews are better drivers. This episode was recorded on the traditional and unceded land of the Gadigal, Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people and edited by audio producer Rudy Bremer on Gadigal country. Thanks for listening, and remember WWDD. What Would Danbury Do is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts.